Number 5. Its economy is in shambles. Vladimir Putin's refusal to withdraw Russian forces from Ukraine after invading the country in early 2022 was met with widespread condemnation from nations around the world. So in an effort to cripple Russia's economy and paralyze its assets, numerous countries imposed unprecedented sanctions, including the United States, Australia, Japan, the European Union, the United Kingdom, and Canada. Just to name a few of these consequences, Russia's largest banks were removed from major international payment processing platforms, and state-owned companies were banned from raising capital through U.S. markets. Measures were also taken to prevent Russia from making moves to offset the impacts of the sanctions. Within days, the ruble's value plummeted to a record low against the US dollar. Russian civilians rushed to withdraw their money from banks, and trading on the country's stock market was temporarily shut down. Several months later, an international forum of finance ministers from various countries agreed to cap the price of Russian oil, severely limiting its ability to profit from sales. In the meantime, Russia's military spending spiraled out of control as Putin failed to achieve the swift victory in Ukraine that he'd predicted. In June 2022, Russia defaulted on its international debt payment for the first time in over 100 years, not due to a lack of funds, but because the sanctions prevented Moscow from having any way to make the payment. And by November, the country was officially in a recession. The situation has only worsened throughout 2023. In mid-August, the ruble's value hit a 17-month low. The drop sent inflation soaring, causing prices to rise rapidly. Some economists have predicted that inflation will continue to surge in the near future. The ongoing shortage of workers, which is being exacerbated by the number of soldiers going off to war, has also contributed to rising inflation. In addition to the sanctions, the cost of war and inflation, Russia is currently experiencing a major domestic fuel shortage. Market sources told Reuters that the shortage was caused by multiple factors, including the weakening ruble, which encourages the export of oil, maintenance and operations at oil refineries, and infrastructure bottlenecks on railways. And that means that the workload is so constant that the industry struggles to keep up with it. This causes time and production costs to increase, which is pretty much the last thing Russia needs right now, especially when it comes to one of its most important domestic commodities. One way to combat the problem would be to curb oil exports, but that would mean losing out on profits, which are already strictly limited by the economic sanctions from the West. Some individual refineries have already started cutting sales, and a few have suspended oil sales completely. Many gas stations imposed limits on how much fuel customers could purchase, and some retailers completely ran out of certain types of gas. Diesel is also in extremely short supply, particularly in retail markets, and it's reportedly unavailable in a lot of places. Despite the grim circumstances, Putin claimed that Russia's economy is on the rise and that wages are increasing, but he couldn't deny that inflation is a major concern, and he implored the country's top financial officials to do everything in their power to keep the situation under control. Putin seems worried about Russia's ability to do damage control on its ailing economy, and experts say that the sanctions imposed by the West seem to be working like a slow poison. For now, he remains committed to his goal of conquering Ukraine, and only time will tell if his position will change. Number 4, it's losing the war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin and his top cronies seemed confident that Russia would have a fairly easy time seizing control of Ukraine. The prediction made sense, considering the fact that Ukraine's military was vastly outnumbered by and far less equipped than the invading Russian forces. But things didn't go as planned. Russian troops were met with fierce resistance from the Ukrainian fighters, and numerous countries donated military equipment and economic assistance to the Ukraine war effort. Meanwhile, much of Russia's equipment proved to be outdated and in poor condition, with the majority of its tanks dating back to the Soviet era. According to news reports, some tanks broke down on the ride into Ukraine to carry out the invasion. giving their crews no choice but to abandon them and continue the journey on foot. Russian fighters didn't expect the level of pushback they were met with, and it's believed that many didn't want to participate in the invasion to begin with. Needless to say, low morale and poor training have been consistent issues among Putin's forces, who weren't exactly giving their all to the war effort. In fact, Russia's military has failed to recruit the kind of support it needs to continue fighting, and in September of 2022, the draft went into effect. Draft dodging has been a consistent problem, prompting Putin to impose strict new measures against draftees in 2023, along with severe consequences for those who fail to abide by their military orders. And as of February 2023, the number of Russian casualties was estimated at 200,000 and counting. Many of the troops fighting along the front lines are poorly trained, while a large number of Russia's elite soldiers have been misused for missions that fall out of line with their skills and expertise. Ukraine also has lost a lot of troops, although experts say it's difficult to ascertain the exact number of deaths due to the country's reluctance to provide that information. But it's believed that Russian casualties are higher, and it's clear that Putin didn't foresee the losses. Many people are of the opinion that Russia has essentially lost the war and that it's time for Putin to throw the towel in and accept defeat. But he's likely not going to do that, and there are also many people who are far from convinced that a Ukrainian victory is guaranteed. Number 3. Ukraine's counteroffensive. In May of 2023, Ukrainian forces launched a counteroffensive against the remaining 3 Russian lines of defense, occupying roughly 1/5 of the country's land. It got off to a slow start as the Ukrainians struggled to recapture territory from well-defended Russian units. At various points throughout the months-long effort, the ongoing fighting seemed like a battle to see which side could wear the other down faster, with neither being willing to relent. During the first 2 months of the counteroffensive, the Ukrainians had only advanced roughly 10 miles along the 100-mile front that was under Russian control. Slowly but surely, though, Ukrainian troops have made some major advances, despite the ongoing challenges they face in their efforts to seize back the occupied region. They have a few things working in their favor, including the dwindling number of elite Russian forces due to mounting casualties. And according to an update from late August 2023, paratroopers were being sent to fight along the front lines when it's not really the appropriate place for their skill set. Moreover, these highly trained forces are often backed by poorly trained entry-level soldiers, which only causes elite units to die faster. In addition to poor training and strategy, Russian troops also remain plagued by low morale. And based on intelligence that was gleaned from captured soldiers and intercepted communications, some Russians are refusing to fight. In addition to Ukraine's sheer determination, the country's forces are benefiting from donated modern military equipment that they've received from other countries, including tanks, armored vehicles, and weapons. Having state-of-the-art technology has given a major boost to the Ukrainian war effort, even if the advance into Russian-occupied territory has been slow. As of September 2023, Russia still controls around 18% of Ukraine's territory. Casualties have been heavy on both sides, and some have even criticized the counteroffensive as a foolish move on Ukraine's part. The country's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba, responded to critics during a meeting among foreign officials by telling them to shut up, making it clear that Ukraine is determined to win back its country once and for all. Do you believe Ukraine has a chance to defeat Russia given its ample support from other countries? Let us know in the comments, and while you're at it, subscribe. Number 2. Prigozhin's mutiny. Yevgeny Prigozhin was a former convict and Russian oligarch who owned several businesses that provided services to the Kremlin. He was close friends with Vladimir Putin and tightly connected with Russia's defense ministry and its military intelligence agency, the GRU. Prigozhin also founded the Wagner Group, a state-funded private military company that supported pro-Russian militaries in Ukraine since 2014. It played a big role in the 2022 invasion of Ukraine and the fighting that followed. Throughout 2022, the group grew from roughly 1,000 members to somewhere between 20,000 and 50,000 members, many of whom were convicts recruited from prison. Then in late 2022, Prigozhin began openly criticizing the Russian military's handling of the war. And a few months later, he expressed anger and frustration at Russian forces for failing to provide the Wagner Group with ammunition. Prigozhin blamed the military for the deaths of several of his men, which he believed would have been prevented if they'd been better supplied. His criticism against the Russians became increasingly harsh over the following months, and he also began calling out the country's top officials and their families for their alleged shortcomings in the war effort. In May of 2023, Prigozhin accused Russian soldiers of abandoning their positions while forbidding Wagner fighters from doing so under the threat of charging them with high treason. Around the same time, he began rebranding his image, touting himself as a spokesperson and advocate for the populace rather than a pro-Putin mercenary leader who'd weaseled his way into Moscow's pocketbook. He got away with saying a lot of things that almost any other Russian public figure would have been arrested or otherwise punished for. When the government began pressurizing Prigozhin to sign paperwork that would integrate the Wagner Group into the military and effectively remove his influence, he refused. Then in late June, he declared war on Russia's Ministry of Defense and called on Wagner Group members to join the fight. Prigozhin claimed that the Russians had attacked his forces first and said that Moscow's justification for invading Ukraine was based on lies and motivated by a desire to further the interests of Russian oligarchs and the government. The next morning, the Wagner Group captured the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don and began advancing towards Moscow. But the rebellion ultimately failed, and Putin refused to even speak with Prigozhin after that. Charges against Prigozhin were dropped, however, after he agreed to move to Belarus. In late August 2023, Prigozhin and 9 other people died in a plane crash while en route from Moscow to St. Petersburg. Prigozhin's remains were identified through DNA analysis. And while the cause of the crash is unclear, US experts have speculated that there was an explosion on board, suggesting the possibility of a deliberate sabotage. The Wagner mutiny marked a turning point in the conflict. Ukraine's national security chief, Oleksiy Danilov, described it as having started the process of Russia's self-destruction. And at the very least, the rebellion exposed some major weaknesses in Russia's handling of the conflict, and it reinforced any existing knowledge that the Russian military is struggling to maintain its morale. Furthermore, it corroborated previous stories about a large number of Russian troops being poorly trained, bitter toward their government, and, in some cases, unwilling to fight. And at number 1, civil unrest. In Russia, the consequences of speaking one's mind can be severe, especially if their opinion goes against the narrative being promoted by those in power. When the invasion of Ukraine began, government officials issued a stern warning that protesters would face severe legal consequences. Despite this, though, thousands of people flooded the streets of Moscow within hours of the invasion to voice their opposition to the war. Demonstrations were also held in numerous other cities. Over 1,800 arrests were made on the first day of the invasion, but the protests continued, and Putin's mobilization of the draft in September of 2022 triggered another wave of demonstrations. Authorities responded by detaining protesters en masse, and on several occasions security forces fired live rounds into the air. An overwhelming number of people have made it clear to Moscow that they disagree wholeheartedly with the war, even at the risk of being jailed. In one open letter that received 1,200 signatures of support, students and staff members of the Moscow State Institute of International Relations stated that they found it morally unacceptable to stay on the sidelines and keep silent when people are dying in a neighboring state. The letter went on to say that it would take generations of diplomatic efforts to rebuild the trust between Russia and its neighbors. Another open letter, written on behalf of Russian arts and culture workers, demanded the immediate withdrawal of the country's troops from Ukraine. It received 17,000 signatures of support, while an online petition condemning the war received nearly 2 million signatures from Russian citizens. People have found other ways to show they disagree with the war, including by wearing green ribbons as a symbol of their opposition and by promoting the slogan, "No to War." This may not seem like a big deal, especially if you live in a country that affords its people the right to free speech, but it takes guts to vocally stand by one's principles in a place where the country's leader has given police his blessing to throw people behind bars for doing so. Another wave of civil unrest came following the death of Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin. By the time he passed away, he'd gone from being one of Putin's closest confidants to gaining favor among a large number of civilians. How long do you think this Russo-Ukrainian war will go on for? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.